They've created these amazing businesses. They've created these successful portfolios. They've done everything so intentionally. And they're realizing, oh, wait, why am I not bringing that same intentionality to my family?
Family legacy work used to happen behind closed doors. Now it's showing up in the Wall Street Journal. Over the past week, more than 20 people have sent me the same article. Wealthy families are writing mission statements to avoid fights, lost fortunes, by Juliet Chung. It's the latest sign that family legacy work is going mainstream. And if the Wall Street Journal is writing about family mission statements, it won't be long before your clients are asking about them. Welcome to Visionary Advisor. I'm your host, Alex Kirby, founder of Total Family. On the special edition of this podcast, I called in Whitney Webb, Managing Director and Head of Family Governance at Cresset, one of the most respected voices in the industry on family dynamics and legacy. We dig into mission statements, family meetings, and how advisors can show up with relevance and impact in these conversations. The article is linked in the show notes. Let's get into it with Whitney Webb. Whitney, we are here talking about this Wall Street Journal article. It came out on October 19th. Juliet Chung is the author. The article is called Wealthy Families Are Writing Mission Statements to Avoid Fights and Lost Fortunes. Mm-hmm. And you and I both have experience on this front, and we thought we would just talk about the article. First, we should probably say, and I think we're in agreement, that just thank you to Juliet for, writing about this. And to me, a lot of families come to us they might have worked with someone like you, they might have worked with a different consultant, and we just don't really feel like there's a perfect way to do any of this. But I think it's great that more people are talking about it and that articles like this are actually getting written and talked about. Did you have people send it to you as well?
Yeah, it was kind of hilarious because I had several friends, obviously colleagues sent it, but friends who, were like, oh, like they know I've been in this niche market for 14 years and I love what my job is, but they have no idea what I do.
Right.
And so for them to send it, I think they're like, look, it's becoming a bit more mainstream to have these conversations. So I was really happy that it was definitely sparking conversation.
Right. Where are you on mission statements?
So that's not where I start. To be honest, mission statements, depending on the family, maybe there's a place for it. I think what you said before was really important, is that there's no one way to do this work. And I think it's really, really important for practitioners in this space to have an open mindset, to have a growth mindset, and really understand that we're constantly learning from one another. And we're constantly adapting not only to the families, but as an industry. So just to kind of set the stage there, I don't start there because I have found in my now 14 years of working with families, there is a necessity to dig deeper than that. What I really liked about the article is that it is highlighting that as the wealth is growing so exponentially for ultra high net worth families, it is really causing this shift for them to look inward. And so I'm hearing a lot more questions around, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my family? How much is enough? What is the purpose of all of this? So I completely understand the idea of a mission statement. However, I think there's more below it. And I know that you agree, given your model.
Yeah, for me, the idea that you have to bring some consistency to some of these words is important. And I think the article uses vision, purpose, values almost interchangeably, and that makes it harder for people. So how we think about it, I want to get your thoughts, is values is a starting point for us, and values to us are what's important to you. So you have values as an individual. You can have values with your partner if you're raising kids. You can have shared values with any group, really. Like you can have shared values for a foundation, but values are what's important to you. Purpose is your why.
Hmm.
which you don't ever achieve. So there was a family in here that had their mission statement, the last line of their mission statement, we will give more than we take to ensure a better world. We will give more than we take to us is a purpose statement because there's not a point where the family says, oh, okay, now we've achieved that. It's more just something that is constantly inspiring you. And then mission to us is a goal.
Hmm.
So if you and I both have young kids, we are like, maybe my wife and I are like, our mission is to, get our three boys out of this house as slightly reasonable people and kind of independent. That's something that we will hopefully achieve.
Hmm.
And then once that mission is complete, we will look to a new mission,
Hmm.
but it will all be under the guise of our purpose, which doesn't totally change once we get it right. And then values are kind of like the things that we don't want to compromise on the journey along there. So again, no right or wrong answer, but I would love just like as someone who's a thought leader in this space, like what do you like? How do you do it differently at Cresset?
Yeah, so we also start with values. However, even before that, I think it's interesting. There was a point in the article. It was talking about like our sole purpose
Mm,
is the entire goal is to preserve the family and to preserve the wealth. This was a
right,
quote from one
right.
of them. And I actually think that so this is where we start because the entire purpose, right, is these is these two things. And what I've noticed in the families that I work with, they want many things. So the four most common goals, so to speak, or
Okay.
I guess outcomes that they want to sustain the family wealth, they want to sustain family harmony, they
Mm.
want to, if there's an operating business, sustain that, and they want to sustain their philanthropic impact, right? So those are the four most common.
But can you
And
say
that's
those again? So they want to
yeah,
sustain the
yeah. So
wealth,
sustain the
harmony.
family wealth, sustain family relationships, sustain an operating family business if there is one, and sustain philanthropic impact.
Okay.
And yes, those are all wonderful, right? And you can say, great, we're going to aim to do all of those. Yet I force everyone to force rank those, right? What if you can't have all of those at the same time? And I don't mean that to look through a negative lens, and I'll talk about that later. I mean, if individual family members have to rank those in priority order, oftentimes they're in different orders, right? And what happens when one of those bumps up against the other? You've got to understand what's most important.
Yep.
So that's typically where we start,
Yep.
right? Because at the end of the day, like, yes, I know you want family harmony. And yes, you want to, let's say, for example, sustain your philanthropic impact. What if at some point that's actually the philanthropic work is actually what's driving a wedge between your family members? What's
Right.
going to give, right? And this happens in so many instances, whether it's with the business or the management of the money, and all of them interplay,
Like we
right?
created this like philanthropic arm and now it's actually creating friction. And
Right.
so this thing that we did because we wanted it to create harmony is actually not creating harmony. So now we have to pivot in some way.
Right, exactly. Or in some cases, what if sustaining and growing the wealth is actually going against some of the philanthropic impact that the family is trying to have, right? So all of these can push up against each other in one way or another. And so that's a place that we start to really get clear with what are we working towards here and what are we using as like what's the lens that we're looking through? What's the number one priority? And we go from there. And I think the values piece is so important in order to, first of all, help everyone feel heard.
Definitely.
Because
Yes.
I've run these activities, I mean, gosh, like hundreds of times now. And you walk into a meeting and there's a group of family members saying, we just have nothing in common. Like, this is like good luck finding overlap, right?
Yeah.
But if you're willing to, if the family's willing to have an open conversation about it, you're going to find trends, you're going to find overlap. Because at the end of the day, like, we're not actually all that different.
Right. I agree with that.
And you can always find something. And again, if you can find something that overlaps and that brings you together, then that becomes the lens that you look through.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Values are to me like a common language for families to talk about things in a way that's not negative.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to pick your kids' values,
Mm-mm.
right? As much as you want to.
Mm-hmm.
The thought, it's like picking my kids' values kind of makes sense to me, but then when I think about my parents picking my values, that doesn't make sense to me. And even if your value words aren't the same, we hear people say like hard work maybe is a value. I learned that from my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the parents don't have hard work as one of their selected values, it can create commonality, or like someone has honesty and someone has integrity, or someone has, entrepreneurship and someone has growth or whatever. So I feel like that the values do create commonality, especially in just like the polarization of the world where people are constantly trying to be like, you're this left, whatever the left is, you're whatever the right is. And it's like, you have to be one or the other. I just don't think it's that simple. And we've had a bunch of families like think that they were way more misaligned with their kids than they actually were once they went through some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think values are great to create that commonality, and then the way that our team takes that a step further is we encourage families to think about how do they define success? How do they
Mm-hmm.
define successful life? We do a lot of work around that because, again, it's the same idea that you probably all want a happy and fulfilled life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Across the board, that's what humans want.
Yeah.
But how you define what that looks like can be very different. So and so this is coming back to like why we don't jump to mission statements
Yeah.
is because the whole point of a mission statement, I understand why people do it, right? It's to get you looking at the same place.
Yeah.
But you first have to focus on who you are and how you're going to show up to any of these goals, like you said, right? Which a mission statement can encompass, or a purpose statement can. But if you're not bringing awareness to who you are and who the individuals are in the room, I just think it's unlikely to be sustainable.
Right. I would have loved if Juliet had said, maybe even referenced something from Jim Grubman in Wealth 3.0 or Jay Hughes in Wealth is Well-Being, because to me, the way Jay defines wealth as the well-being and flourishing of a family, and then has the capitals, like a lot of people don't know about that. And if you think about the wealth like that, about the intellectual, social, cultural, human, and I'm missing one, the five capitals for a family, it's like the money isn't the ultimate goal. The money becomes a tool to help the family be okay. And I don't think most people, if you ask them, like, do you want to sustain money or do you want your family to be okay? Most people would pick, I want my family to be okay and to be flourishing. We don't just want money, And so the money lens, I understand that it's the wealth advisors doing this, and that so like it's natural to come through that money lens, but getting the family to step back from the money for a second, to me, is really important. And sometimes it's difficult when we're working with wealth advisors. I think very often they will jump to money without even realizing it, where we're talking about like the education of the young people. And they'll be like, oh, yes, financial education is important. And it's like, no, just remove the word financial. The growth and education of the young people is important. We can think about education broadly too, not just through the lens of, them understanding the trusts and the mechanics of the wealth, but just understanding like, what is the history of our family? What are some of the secrets of our family? It could just be like a secret family recipe. It could be like the culture of our family. There's a lot more to education than just money. So I hope that as more of these articles get written, that some of the people that have had some of the foundational ideas that I know have shaped how you and I think about this work continue to get weaved in.
Yeah, I hope there's more and more articles like this, and I'm glad it's out there. But I think that, yeah, there's people who who have a lot to say, right? We've seen this film before, right?
Yeah.
We've seen this happen over and over again. And I wanted to just comment on your point about I think so when I started in this industry about 14 years ago, it really was to educate families on finance, right? Really, and I think most of this work was through the lens of financial literacy education for inheritors. And what I learned pretty quickly is that's really just that's kind of the that's like the gateway drug, so to speak, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the Trojan horse. Like that's how you get into the real conversations, and we can see why when you look at data that is showing how little financial literacy education actually changes behavior. And I'm
Is
talking
that true?
about this is like in the school system and everything.
Okay. Right.
It has less than a 1% chance of actually changing any behavior. So why would you think that it would work necessarily in this bigger context of someone inheriting a lot of wealth? And I think it's because it's missing the heart, right?
Yeah.
It's missing the relevance to the individual human beings, right? Because at the end of the day, how you spend and interact with money is not going to depend on your knowledge of fixed versus variable income or different types of asset classes.
Right.
It's going to depend on your relationship, not only with wealth, but around the family members that you are interconnected with in managing it. And so I do think that financial literacy education is important, first of all. But second of all, I think it's a really easy starting place because otherwise this stuff can feel really overwhelming.
Right. How do you think about like in this case, it seems like the patriarch is driving this work, which props to the patriarch because that's leading by example, right? Like, just caring enough to do some of this stuff, I think it just says a lot about how much this person cares about their family. And that shows the family a lot, just that. Even if you don't get to the outputs that you want, just the fact that you're trying, I think is relevant. But how do you think about a patriarch saying like, I'm deciding all the goals and things for my family, even though I have 4 or 5 adult kids and now all these grandkids, I'm trying to like maybe impose in the wrong word, but I'm trying to make the decisions for everyone down in these generations after me. How do you think about like the autonomy piece of this and managing maybe stronger personalities and people who want to be more in control?
So I'll jump straight to a story because this was the exact scenario of a client call that I had yesterday, so less than 24 hours ago. It was this family, the parents of 4 young adult kids,
Yeah.
contacted me for support in crafting a constitution or a charter. And the dad sent me a full draft, all written out with family values, with vision, with all of the stipulations. And his wife had kind of behind the scenes been saying, this doesn't feel right. Shouldn't we include the kids? So they contacted me, and I confirmed. I said, hey, this is a beautiful charter. It's really well thought out, and it's probably going to do nothing except remove some of the kind of trust and connection that you have with your kids. And so we went back to the start, and we've had several conversations, and my team and I have interviewed the kids. We've pulled together themes and insights. We're bringing them together soon to start defining some of these things together around values and defining success and thinking about roles and responsibilities. And on this call yesterday, just because this is obviously a very fast moving guy, he's
Yeah.
built super successful company. I get it. He wants to get stuff done. And every call I have to tell him, slow down. This is the right way to do it. This
Right.
is, this is the best way. Because if you want kids to see, and I say kids as in just the
Yeah. They're like
next gen,
adult. Yeah. They're adult people. Yeah.
if you want them to care, if you want them to see themselves in whether it's a document or a mission statement or whatever you're going to create, right? They've got to not only be part of it, part of the process, but they have to see their voice in it
Yeah.
in some way or another. Yeah, I mean, I kind of require it, honestly, in my work with families because I don't think I'm going to be effective if I'm just coming in to create a policy that's worked for another family. I don't think it's going to be useful if I come in just to educate the rising gen, right?
Right.
There's a lot of ways that you're not getting to the root of it.
Okay, so two follow-up questions here because mostly advisors are listening to this. So you're dealing with the patriarch who maybe built a business,
Mm-hmm.
was a founder, CEO, likes to get stuff done, hard-charging personality. Have you found anything that is like helpful to get that person to be receptive when they're trying to push everyone? Is there anything that you found to be like a way to help them slow down, see another perspective, like basically the situation that you just had?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can even start with somewhat funny questions like, how do you feel when people tell you exactly how your
Right.
life is supposed to play out over
Sure.
the next 40 years, 50
Right.
years,
Right.
right? And say, how might your kids react to that? And then I think a lot of it is advisors are in this unique position because they work with so many families, right? And again, you can say, I've seen this play out,
Uh-huh.
right? And in these circumstances, it is the process that's much more valuable than the outcome.
Yeah.
Um, and
Right. Yes.
and
Yes.
just really understanding that fostering those conversations, it is going to increase trust and communication and just general connection, which is kind of the whole point,
Yeah.
right, of even writing a charter or constitution, because you want the next generation to have all of those things with each other, right?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's definitely highlighting the process, but I think for advisors, it's also really important that they honor that part of the brain of the founder that wants to keep things moving. You can do this work efficiently. You can do this work in a structured way,
Yeah.
right? It just might mean we're going to have 3 introspective calls to talk about these things, include your kids at this point, craft, a vision statement or a shared values statement at this point. You can still come up with the timeline, right? It's just you're not going straight to the outcome.
I love what you said just about the process being kind of the whole point of it, just like we don't need to do the family road trip. We'll just take a picture at the end of it. It's like actually the stuff that happens on the trip is the stuff that matters in a lot of ways. So I love that. If you have if the advisors, sometimes we hear the advisors like struggling with the fact that this person in charge is the person that brought you in.
Hmm.
They're the person with the financial resources. And sometimes you hear it like from the rising gen where they're like, that's my parents' advisor. They don't really feel like they're being represented, even though they are. They feel like this person is still in control. How do you balance that in Cresset?
Yeah, I mean, I've got I've got a lot of families where the matriarch or patriarch is never going to give up control. And so, first of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge you're never going to have like the gold-plated solution here 100% of the time.
Yeah, right. Of course. Yes.
You're just not. And what I'm finding, so when I get brought in to situations like that where, right, G1 is just not going to budge, you respect that, you honor that, and you find other ways to engage with the second generation with the blessing of the first, right? And again, this is where it comes through that lens of education. And probably naturally, they're going to hear some of the frustrations of the second generation. And
Yeah.
it's really important to not get dug in as, right, like this person who's just hearing complaints on both sides.
Right. Right.
You don't want to necessarily act as a mediator. If I see that there is no room for budging on G1, I just try to help G2 get really clear around what can they control,
Yeah.
right? What can you control now? And when the time is right, when might we start scenario planning what it looks like when G1 is no longer in control? And I think it's really interesting because I'm finding more and more that it's G2 reaching out to us,
Interesting.
to our team. It's members of the family who feel like they had so little insight into what was going on growing up. They feel like they still have no control or autonomy. They feel completely disempowered.
Hmm.
And the last thing that they want is for their kids to feel that way. And so how do we find ways, even if they still don't have the full insight, the full transparency, you can still find ways to break that cycle
Yeah.
of disempowerment and control and, shame.
Right.
And that's where I see more and more people coming in.
I wish I could remember the comedian because it's like whatever our parents are like doing to us, we like we have to go the opposite. And he was saying like his dad never said he loved you, and he thinks like his daughter's gonna have a complex because
Mhm.
he tells her he loves her so much
Yeah.
that like she's gonna go the other way and just like so that's funny when I've heard from different advisors that they can maintain their relationship with everyone in the family. So if it's a multi-gen, it's still one advisor, but they're like, the stuff that G2 tells them, they don't repeat and all that kind of stuff. And then I've heard some firms who assign different advisors. Do you have a feel on like what tends to work better or what you've seen work better?
Well, our protocol is always like we just try to get ahead of it. So as a team, and I try to advise advisors to do it, right? Like when you start working with a family, you can ask the question, right? Like you can
Yeah.
say like, I want to treat your whole family as my client. Do I have your permission to do that?
Right.
And if I do, then the only way that it works is I'm not a mole, right? I'm not here, like
Yeah.
every conversation that I have is going to be, it's going to be sacred, right? I'm
Right.
not going to be sharing things between family members. And that works. I mean, I just make sure I repeat that at least 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And then maybe every quarter after that.
Yeah. Right. Right.
You just have to really hammer it in and just be very clear, like, look, this isn't just about my personal ethics. This is about what works. And if you want your family to be engaged and educated, you need to create the platform and the space for them to feel safe doing so.
I love it. In this article, they talk about the creation of constitutions, family constitutions. We do not, I think Total Family is known probably more for some of the foundational work,
Hmm.
and the Constitution is pretty complex, not needed by every single family. Can you teach us about constitutions and like, is it a legal document? Is there a template? You know, how does a family know if they need a constitution? Anything that you can tell us about constitutions and that you think might be helpful for people who aren't super familiar with it.
Yeah. I think depending where a family is in their life cycle, right? So whether are you G1? What generation are you in? Maybe you need a complex charter to answer questions that are coming up or, going to come up shortly in one
Okay.
generation or another. I think a lot of times a very simple version of it will suffice. So let me backtrack. So first of all, I don't think so it's not a legally binding document. It really is creating, I mean, caveat, unless there's, say, like an operating business involved
Sure. Sure.
as part of that, right? But
It's not a
it,
legal document unless it's actually a legal document.
yeah, exactly. Most families when families think of governance and they're like, ooh, governance, looks, that sounds technical. So let me write a charter.
Yep.
I would say 60% of the time, families don't need it, maybe even more than that, at least from my sample of a couple hundred clients at this point.
Yeah.
Um, I,
Ultra high net worth clients. Yeah.
yeah. And I think it comes back to the process being more important than the outcome. Maybe I drag it out a little bit too long, but I have that luxury because clients are with Cresset for the long term, but I will spend 2 or 3 years creating that charter or constitution because within some of those decisions that you're making, there are phenomenally big implications for those decisions. Right? How will family members and their kids interact with the wealth? Are spouses involved? Can family members work for a family office? And if so, what needs to, what milestones do they need to reach? What's our policy on our foundation and philanthropic giving?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many topics that come in there and they're big. So again, to just sit down and fire through them for the sake of efficiency it's not helping anyone.
Right.
Because then you're just going to have to go back and make a bunch of amendments. So for me, creating a charter, the big value is in the thought experiment of it and going through this scenario planning and coming up with, okay, so our best, our best decision right now, this is, how we feel as a group is to go with this. And we think that there's going to be the least conflict moving forward. We think this is aligned with our values, all of those things. So I will say what's really important though is I always think about in my work, you've got to balance the formality with just the family, like just the nature of family. And I think charters can sometimes just suck the heart out of
Yeah,
things.
totally. Yes.
And so I think a charter without the heart and the human element, it's just a document that you could have created on ChatGPT,
Right.
which anyone can do that right now. If you want to know what's in a charter, ask ChatGPT,
Yeah,
and it'll
right.
give you a great template, right? And that can be a starting point for the conversations. But again, it's the process.
Right. I know you have heard this, but like when you're in the governance space, even though I don't think either of us love that word, we
Yeah.
tend to just talk about legacy. But when we say governance or dynamics, people will often say like, "Oh, I have this client, their family is so messed up, they're perfect for you," And so sometimes when you read these articles, it's always through the lens of dysfunction,
Yeah.
where like succession gets referenced and all the money destroys people and everyone's horrible and it's like infighting and all this kind of stuff. That's just not my experience. My
No, mine
my
either.
experience is that these families, money doesn't make you bad. Just like it doesn't make you generous. Like if you weren't generous before you had money, you're probably not going to be that generous after you have money. And so I feel like families that are slightly interested in this space, just to know that you don't have to have dysfunction to do some legacy work or governance work. Like you can actually just be a happy, successful, normal family doing their best that wants to preemptively be thoughtful about your family and the longevity and well-being of your family. Like that's I think what Jim was getting to in the Wealth 3.0 stuff, where he's just like, it doesn't have to be negative. And I just want to, there's a little bit of that in this article. I don't think it's a negative article at all, but when advisors talk to families or are thinking about families, you don't just have to think about families that have had trauma and horrible things happen to them. You can think of families that are doing great and want to stay that way and want to invest in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting at Cresset because it's a lot of pre and post sale entrepreneurs.
Right.
And so it's the wealth creators. And I will say especially in my work over the last 4 or 5 years, it's pretty self-selecting who comes to me. And it's the families who want to be proactive, right?
Yeah.
We can thank the TV show Succession for that, right? There is a bit of there's some fear there, but we mostly are getting families who, they've created these amazing businesses. They've created these successful portfolios. They've done everything so intentionally, and they're realizing, oh wait, why am I not bringing that same intentionality to my family and creating the culture that I want my kids to grow up in and creating again this space where the wealth doesn't overpower everything.
Yeah.
Or again, you redefine what wealth is, right? Which
Right.
comes back to the forms of capital. So, that being said, we did recently add a new hire on our team, someone who she's a licensed therapist, and she's worked primarily with ultra high net worth families. And we did that because sometimes when you do open the door to these conversations, other stuff comes out, and it's really important to be able to dig deep enough
Yeah.
for people to feel like they're part of it. Because, I think it's great to do the values activities. I think everyone should be doing it. I honestly do. And when there's this level of complexity at hand, you need to have practitioners who can dig a little bit deeper if
Yeah.
you're if you are seeing like any signs of dysfunction, or you're seeing, structures that are set up in a way where you're like, ooh, that's not going to be pretty.
Right. Right.
Because, again, this is where, like, at Cresset, we view it as we're constantly giving our advisors tools to start the conversations, to lead what they can. And then they pull in our team when the complexity is there.
Right. Yeah. I would say to the advisors, like, just be honest with your clients about when you're getting to an area where you don't feel comfortable. And, when we are trying to get advisors to introduce legacy, I think sometimes the default is for them to act like they've done it a lot. All the thousands of times that it's like it versus if you go the other way and you're like, hey, we have this new tool, Total Family, or hey, we're working with Whitney's team. I've never actually worked with her team before. So I'm not 100% sure what to expect. If you could just help me in this process and tell me what's helpful and where the questions are, like, I feel like that approach of just being really vulnerable and honest is actually going to get the clients to help you in the journey, as opposed to acting like you are, you've done it 1,000 times. And even though that might hurt your ego a little bit, I think you actually get the clients, they're more receptive to your authenticity. And then, so on that vein, just saying like, hey, this conversation is at a point that I didn't totally know it would get to, and I feel like we should hit pause and just like regroup. Just I think advisors just being aware of that and not keeping, continuing to go further down the path of acting like they know how to handle trauma or something that is out of their swing zone.
Yeah, what we tell our advisors often, and honestly, what we have to remind ourselves sometimes, walking into these meetings, is it's not our job to go and solve all of the problems of this family,
Mm-hmm.
and especially not in this, hour-long meeting. It's about getting really clear on our purpose is to facilitate some of these really important conversations, help clients turn inward, right? In this world where they're probably constantly building and creating and managing, right? So help them turn inward and then see where the conversations flow. And I think it's important for advisors to know, first of all, like you said, where their comfort, like where's their boundary, and then also who are their backups.
Yeah. And also like when you're referring someone, you and I we had this actual thing happen to us, but I think also when you're referring someone, you got to be honest about how well you know this person that you're referring. Like, hey, I'm sending you to Whitney. We've sent her 10 clients. They always have an amazing experience. That doesn't mean she's going to be the perfect fit for you, blah, blah, blah. Versus
Yeah.
like, I've never used you. Oh, but let me act like I have or something like that. Because the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is just every advisor is going to have smaller sample sizes. And the chances of you having, 50 governance referrals a year is very, very small. So saying something like, I've never referred someone to insert person before, but I've heard great work. I've heard they do great work. I haven't worked with them personally, but just being, again, like, just be super honest with people when you're bringing in these resources, because acting like you've done this a bunch of times and they come back and they're like, I had a horrible experience with this person. You're like, oh, actually, we've never sent anyone there before. You know, it's
Yeah. I think
setting you
that
up.
I think that overconfidence and really over indexing on expertise is out. And I think
Hmm.
that authenticity and vulnerability is what's in.
Cool.
Uh, and I hope it stays that way.
Yeah.
Gosh, especially if you're talking to anyone in Gen Z, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that applies 99% of the time, but that is trickling up. So
Yeah.
I, yeah, so I completely agree with you. I mean, just go with what's true. You also don't want to pretend to not be an expert in something if you are. Like you don't want to pretend like if you know something, if you can share stories of what other families have done, if you can share again authentic experiences, then sure, do it. You can also
Yeah.
disclaim, I haven't worked with every ultra high net worth family in the world.
Right.
Just a reminder, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point about the rising gen and the younger generations on the authenticity. We certainly see that from the brands that they resonate to. Like, if you're a brand that says, we care about this thing, like, you actually need to care about it or you're going to get roasted by
I'll tear
by
you
these
apart.
folks. And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's true of advisors. Like, if you're going to, you have to lead by example by the way that you're living your own life and the stuff that you're caring about and how you're going about your business, because you can't sit there and just tell people all the things that they need to do when you're not doing any of them in your own life too. And
Yeah.
so I love that authenticity call out. Now we have the last thing I want to ask you about is family meetings, because in this article they reference, like, I think this particular family had an annual family meeting, but Jay Hughes says there's not an example of a successful multi-generational family that doesn't use family meetings in some way, shape, or form. So I'd be surprised if you disagreed with that, but feel free to disagree with it and just tell us how you think about family meetings.
I think that they are an incredibly powerful tool. I think that the formality of them is what should change given the
Yes.
situation of a family. Advisors come to our team all the time. Can you give us an agenda for a family meeting? No, I don't know anything about the family, right?
Do you think it's the family's responsibility to create the agenda or the advisors?
Well, I think it's a collaboration. I mean, I think, again, this is bring all the ideas to the table. And if you're talking about, if the advisor wants to do the final design and everything, but no, absolutely, the family has to have say in it. Again, that
Yeah.
comes back to the process, right? Do you want them to pay attention?
Hmm.
But no, I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, there's nothing like having people in a room to have very real conversations about something that's going to impact them greatly, right? You should you should have facilitated conversations, and I'm not saying it has to be externally facilitated, right? Depends on the topic. However, I do think that there's also something to be said for when a family is still mom, dad, and two young kids. You can start that culture by having a family meeting at the dinner table for 10 minutes every Sunday, right? You can start it really simply, build that into your culture. And yes, it's going to grow in complexity as your wealth does, as your family does, as there's new people marrying in, right? But I just don't overcomplicate it
Yeah.
too soon because then you're creating this feeling of, wow, this is so much like
Right.
from a very young age.
It puts a lot of pressure on the meeting, like, if you've ever gone to an executive offsite and then, like, for 3 months leading up to it, everyone's like, we're going to cover that in the meeting. We're going to cover that in the meeting. And you're like,
Yeah.
we're not going to do any of this stuff. I love what you said about formality, because this in very often when you hear about family meetings, they're like multi-day in Aspen or Hawaii or whatever. And so you can do it at the dinner table, right?
Hmm.
Like, you can do it in a setting that is, you could do a virtual meeting if it's in a people spread out. It doesn't have to be at this, getaway succession style family meeting. There's family meetings in all sorts of forms as as we think about them. And then on the formality front, it's like, it also doesn't have to be a PowerPoint presentation in a boardroom. I think people enjoying the family meetings is okay. Like, you could do something and then go on a hike, or do something and then, do something fun together too. The word meeting sort of makes it sound already miserable. I forget, someone used a different word that I really liked, but I think overly formal is probably not great, especially if you think about how the younger people are responding to this type of
Yeah.
stuff. So removing some of that formality, I think, is a great idea.
Yeah. And honestly, we could have a whole separate conversation just on this because I think that
We
um,
should. We should do that.
there's so many ways that family meetings can be transformative for the people attending. I have seen it, it almost always includes laughter and tears. But, in the really good ones, it's including just a different way of being with one another
Hmm.
after that meeting, right? And I have been slotted into family meetings and had nothing to do with the rest of the agenda. And I've seen it's just another lever of control.
Yeah.
And that's when you get people really dreading showing up. You want people to want to go. You don't necessarily want it to be a requirement, but again, we could talk about that for a whole other hour.
Whitney, thank you so much for making yourself available for this emergency podcast. The article is going to be in the show notes. We'll put your contact info on the show notes. Keep doing great work. Oh, you got one more thing.
I got one more thing. I
All
wanted
right.
to say this
Oh, let's
first.
see.
I think so.
I should
One,
have asked you if you had one more thing. That's a
no,
host.
no,
That's a host. That's on me.
it's all good. It's all good. I got you. So one thing I'm always thinking about advisors today and just the overwhelm that they must be feeling because they're no longer just advisors. I think that the expectation is shifting that they're educators, they're coaches, they're mentors, all of these facilitators, all of these things. And so I think it's really important, back to what we were talking about before, be really clear with the family where your skill sets lie and that you have this curiosity and desire to learn more to support them in these ways. And
Yeah.
also, I think advisors need to go easy on themselves, right? They don't have to play all of these roles perfectly, but I think it's really good to consider, right? Like, where are you going to lean in
Yeah.
and, and just start to learn from your peers and make yourself a more well-rounded advisor.
That's a great spot to end on because like you obviously have been doing this work for 14 years. So you're better now than you were 14 years ago,
Man,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
So
I've done
like,
stupid stuff for sure.
right, of course. So giving as advisors, just like no, giving yourself room to grow, as you said, not giving yourself such a hard time. But if this is an area of interest, legacy, dynamics, governance, whatever you want to call it, like do the work, read, grow, try, and you're going to look back 5, 10 years from now and be like, oh man, I was so green. Now I'm actually comfortable doing this stuff. So that's a great spot to end on today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for the great conversation.
That is all we have for you today, Visionary Advisors. Until next time, remember the future of wealth starts with you.